Hello, and welcome back to the Research Comms podcast. This week, we will be digging deep into a thorny question that, in many ways, is yet to be resolved. It's a live debate. And the question is, what exactly is public engagement? How can it be defined, and why is it so important when it comes to generating impact from research? My guest, who will be guiding us through this complex issue, is Kimberley Freeman, Executive Officer for Public Engagement at Queen Mary University of London, which is one of the UK's leading universities when it comes to public engagement. But her impact on the public engagement world is by no means limited to the work that she does at Queen Mary's. She's highly active outside of it. Many of the people listening will know her from her role as an organiser of the London SciComm Socials, where science communicators gather at the pub on a regular basis to talk about everything science SciComm related. She also organises an annual SciComm Symposium, next one coming up in June, as well as putting on workshops, training sessions, you name it. She was also incredibly helpful to me when I first entered the world of public engagement. Having spent the previous decade working in television documentaries, Kimberley was very generous with her time and her knowledge and her contacts in helping me make that transition and working out ways in which I could use my skills as a digital media producer to help researchers boost their own public engagement efforts. And she was generous again with her time and knowledge when she agreed to sit down with me a couple of weeks ago to shine a light on some of the most common questions that people have about public engagement. Aside from defining the term, we also discussed what researchers can get out of it, how to obtain funding for public engagement projects, and tips on how to evaluate whether or not a public engagement project has had real impact. So without further ado, here is that conversation with Kimberley. So thank you very much, Kimberley, for coming to meet me today.
Hi.
The work that you do is public engagement, and you were incredibly helpful when I started out in this world. My background was in television documentaries, and I was sort of pursuing more and more kind of working with research organisations, helping them with their communication. But I didn't know at the time that there was any difference between standard research communications and public engagement. I didn't really know what... Exactly, can you believe it? I didn't know what public engagement was particularly, and it is quite a specific... I'd say sector, isn't it? So if you could maybe start by explaining about the definition of public engagement and how it differs to straight up research communication.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I work in public engagement mostly with research, but not only, also with teaching and kind of the core business of a university, which means that one of my very favourite things to do is to spend all of my time defining what I do. Because that is every conference you've ever been to, every meeting we have about every grant application. Shall we just stop a minute and define what we mean by public engagement, which means you can normally hear my head thunk against the table.
Sorry,
but no. It's right. It's really important. And the reason we keep talking about it is because it is really important. Generally speaking, there is a nationally agreed definition from the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, or NCCPE for short, which is quite long. It includes the phrase myriad of ways, which I always think is a great thing to put in a definition. Just cover everything. The most important thing to take from it is that it is about sharing knowledge and experience, and that sharing should go in two directions. So it should be mutually beneficial and should involve listening as well as speaking. And that's what kind of separates it from more traditional communications activity, which might be more about kind of one-way transmission of information out from a source out to a kind of waiting audience. This is more about both sides of that conversation getting something. But the reason we spend so long defining it is that it's not as simple as that. So public engagement can be sort of broken down to three sections. That's how I like to think of it. So you've got the transmission model stuff, you've got the put stuff out there. Yeah. At the other end of that, you've got the consultation model. So listening to people, putting out public consultations, surveys, what do you think of this thing? Yeah. And then the bit in the middle, which is the bit that my team at QMUL are most interested in, is the kind of co-creation bit, the bit where you create something together as a researcher and your public audience, whoever they may be. That could be a paper, research paper, it could be a sculpture, it could be a conversation, it could be a drawing, it could be anything. But as peers, you create something together. Of course, in practice, you tell people about something, transmit it, you listen to what they think, consult, you do something together, collaborate, you share the results, you transmit, you see if you've made a difference, consult. So you're always really doing all of it. But it is useful to break it down. And I think a lot of us in the public engagement world have come to the conclusion that the best way of thinking about it is not what the outputs look like, but more the process and the why. So why are you doing it? Because if you ask people, what public engagement have you seen? What does it look like? You get hundreds and hundreds of different answers. Like, it's really hard then to look at that amorphous kind of portfolio of stuff and go, how is this all the same thing?
Yeah.
But actually behind all of that, if you sit down with a researcher and you go, why do you want to talk to people about what you do? Who do you actually want to speak to? Like, really think about that audience. And then, okay, how is the best way of doing that? My job is to ask those 3 questions to researchers all the time, and the answers are always wildly different. So the products are always wildly different, but actually the process that we go through in the university is the same.
Right.
And to me, that's what public engagement is. It's that kind of process of, let's understand why what you're doing in your research would be useful for you to have a conversation with someone. Who is that someone? Or who are those people? And then based on the answers to those first 2 questions, let's come up with a how. But if you go in for a how, it's really hard to define it, which is why you end up with a definition which has myriad of ways.
Well, at least it's keeping it loose. So do you feel, are there certain research projects that lend themselves more easily to public engagement, or do you think any kind of research could have a public engagement element?
Oh, it's a controversial question. This is where I'm going to annoy the physicists.
Okay.
Always.
Right.
Which is, a bit of a hobby, it seems. I don't mean that. I love my team of physicists. I love you. But generally speaking, I think different research cultures tend to lend themselves more to engagement. And I find this working in university. So I will deliver pub training on what is public engagement and why should you do it, or how to evaluate it. And if I say something like, you might want to ask a particular public group to help you shape your research question, you get kind of medics sitting in your audience going, well, obviously I wouldn't do it any other way. Why are you even bothering to say this? This is just how we do research. And then you get physicists and mathematicians going, that is ridiculous and a really stupid thing for you to suggest that I do. So it really does depend. I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't go in to a conversation assuming that it is not possible to do public engagement with certain kinds of research, because that means you prevent certain things happening. And I've seen brilliant public engagement projects with subjects which traditionally you would have gone, oh no, that's too difficult. Theoretical maths can't be a thing that you can engage people with. Astrophysics, you can't do that with. But actually, there are projects that do that. So I think if you assume you can't, then you stop a lot of excellent work happening. But you do have to acknowledge that the way we talk about it tends to lend itself to medical research and humanities. Yeah. And some of the STEM subjects feel like this collaborative approach isn't something that can work with their research practice. But if you take the mutually beneficial part of the definition, there is still a lot you can learn as a scientist, even if it's not as obvious as, hey, member of the public, what do you think I should research? Because that's not going to be helpful. But there are still conversations you can have that will shape how you think about things, or how you interpret results, or how you share your findings afterwards. So it varies, I think. It's sometimes... I enjoy sometimes being provocative and saying, of course, everyone can do it. It's completely possible. Can you see people kind of bristle? And they're like, no. And I'm like, you're the one I want to have a conversation with. It's like a way of picking people out of a crowd. But with my sensible hat on, it lends itself more to other work, but I think it's possible everywhere.
Okay, great. But so it's interesting, though, that you mentioned there that sort of the humanities and medical research lends itself better than perhaps the STEM subjects, because from my experience going to public engagement conferences and so on, I've often felt that it's a field that seems quite heavily dominated by STEM subjects, and the humanities, perhaps they're there, but maybe it's sort of on the fringes to an extent. So I was going to ask you about that, but maybe that's something you don't agree with.
Well, no, I think it is. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think quite often some of the humanities subjects I work with don't see what they do as public engagement. They just see it as part of their job. So they don't see it as this separate thing, so which means it's hard to delineate it. Also, I would say that the funding is a big answer to that. There's seemingly a lot more money kind of floating around for people to do engagement work with STEM subjects. I think because we acknowledge that perhaps it's a bit harder in theory. So there's kind of this push of, you've got the Wellcome Trust, you've got the research councils going, actually we need to do a bit more to talk to people about STEM subjects. So I think there's this external drive on those subjects more so than there is with others, which means there's more opportunities for them, and you get this very much science communication culture. And when we ran some training at my previous job at UCL for arts and humanities, Research Council funded people, we found we had to change our language, because if you spoke about public engagement, the assumption was you meant public engagement with science. Right. And people wouldn't come to the training, so we had to call it something else. I'm aware that sort of there is a language thing there where public engagement tends to be seen as a sort of a STEM initiative, and therefore overlapping heavily with science communication.
And I think sort of as well, just sort of following on Twitter and so on, you've got the kind of the SciComm hashtags and so on. It's a very sort of vibrant, active, enthusiastic community, and perhaps I suppose maybe it's just a case that sort of the social sciences and, as you say, the humanities, they're doing it anyway. Perhaps it's sort of less cohesive in that sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously you've spoken to Michael Eads before in this series, and without being human, I think it would be difficult to pinpoint a kind of central point for engagement with humanities research where they all get together. Whereas if you look at science research, you can name a whole load of opportunities, like are people going to the Cheltenham Science Festival? Are they going to the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition? Are they doing a thing at the Royal Institution? There's all these kind of props that people can either aim for or see around them. And I do think that's perhaps not as obvious in the humanities, but also if you're working in drama and you're doing drama research, you might put on a play, and we don't necessarily think of that as being an engagement activity in quite the same way as we do about scientists giving a talk.
So, I mean, public engagement generally seems to be, there's a growing sort of focus on it and attention to it and recognition of its importance. That hasn't always been the way, has it? I mean, even in the time that sort of you've been working in it, how has the landscape sort of changed in that time, and then maybe looking back further, sort of 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't born that
no,
far
of
ago.
Course you
but I mean, I could say when I was 2, I felt that the public engagement landscape was particularly weak in the UK. So I guess I really started working in this kind of at the end of the Beacons project, which was the NCSP funded Wellcome Trust Research Council's Beacons for Public Engagement project, which is this big kind of grants available to universities to embed this and to change the culture of universities, so the public engagement was a thing that was valued and that was done. And that's coming up to 10 years ago now.
Right, okay.
So I started work at sort of the end of that. And that seemed to give us the current language to talk about it. That gave us National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. It gave us these kind of university teams like the one that I run. So the team that I run at Queen Mary, University of London, sort of started in the Catalyst round of funding, which was the round that followed the Beacons. So you had Beacons, then you had Catalyst, then you had Catalyst seed funds as these kind of big pots of money to help embed this. So it's changed because there's been that push on it. But I think also the big change has been the pressures on academics. So now you're expected to cover pathways to impact in your research grant. If anyone is listening and doesn't know what that is, you're very lucky. Hope that you never have to. And the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, is this, it's how universities are kind of measured on how good they're doing in terms of their research, and that now has an impact section, which public engagement is a route to achieving. It's not all of it, but it's certainly how a lot of researchers are going, I'm going to demonstrate impact for my research through my public engagement work, which means you've got these drivers on a university to put money into it and to think about it, to talk about it, and to kind of run around panicking, going, oh God, what is it and why are we doing this?
Right, yeah. And I mean, obviously Queen Mary University London, the institution that you work for, takes it very seriously and has done very well and sort of, been recognised for the work that it's done. What sets your university apart perhaps from some others who may be a bit further behind? I mean, where's that impetus come from within Queen
Mary? It came initially from the very ethos of Queen Mary right at the start. We were funded as part of the People's Palace, founded rather than funded, as part of the People's Palace, which is for the entertainment and enrichment of the people of the East End. And we've kind of had this very, at times somewhat patronising view that we are there to help and educate everyone around us, but generally, largely it comes from a nice place and a feeling of wanting to be a good neighbour. And that's our kind of ethos at Queen Mary. So we want to be a good neighbour to the people that we live among and we work among. And so that's set up the idea that you wouldn't keep everything inside and you wouldn't be really secretive and you would share what you had. And that really helped create an atmosphere where public engagement could thrive. I think also we've got particularly good leadership at Queen Mary in terms of public engagement support. They've been quite clear in advocating this is something that we should do. They've funded the team, said yes, have some full-time members of staff to think about this stuff and to support people. And obviously it's brilliant. We've awarded the NCSP watermark at gold level. We're the only institution to get one. Super exciting. It was difficult though when we got that though for everyone was congratulating my team and we were like, no. The university has won this. Thank you, but it's the university, not us.
The whole idea is it's supposed to be collaborative.
So I think, we're lucky in that, but that doesn't mean we don't hit resistance. It doesn't mean that there aren't still people who won't do this or don't want to do this or don't feel it's for them. There are still people who are based at Queen Mary who don't know what the team is or that we exist or that we can help them. So it's by no means kind of all done and dusted and embedded. There's still you have to get up every day and go in and try and push to keep it happening.
And so where you mentioned this sort of resistance from some quarters, what do you think is what tends to be behind that people are reluctant to get involved with public engagement?
Lots of things. I think there is a kind of long-held answer to this, which is a lack of time, which I think is incredibly true. The pressures on academic colleagues are huge, but if you dial down under that, it's more about a question of priority, because you can make time for things that you think are important. It's hard to make time for things that aren't a priority for you, and there are loads of reasons they won't be a priority. They could have supervisors or bosses who say, don't do this, get back in the lab and do more moving small amounts of whatever you do in science around. I was an archaeologist, I don't understand. I'm sorry. Whatever you do in a lab, move the test tube back and forth, that thing that you do.
Colourful pipettes.
Right? I mean, I don't know. There might be that, produce more papers, teach more students, run more courses. And so finding time to do anything, in theory, on top of that feels unlikely, which is why we're really passionate about the message that public engagement can be a way you do your work, not an extra thing on top of your work. It can be how you come up with your course material. It can be how you do your research. A small part of that, rather than, okay, I've got to do all this teaching, I've got to do all this research, and I've got to do public engagement. Because no, it should be helping you do your work. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And I talk people out of public engagement quite often as well if it's not going to help them.
Right. Okay.
Which is, people think, oh, surely you must want everyone to do it all the time. I'm like, no.
Don't want it to be tokenistic.
No, don't do the bad stuff that's going to stress you out, make you tired, help no one. No, just don't.
Public engagement a bad name for all.
You're going to hate it. You're never going to do it again because you're going to have a terrible time on this project. That's not helping anyone.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose that, are there certain people who are sort of more predisposed towards it because of the way they are, or what sort of training is there in place for helping people to sort of learn some of the skills involved? Yeah,
I think you get a lot. I think you also get quite a lot of people assuming based on their research topic that they can't do it because the topic feels dull as well.
Right. Okay.
So it might not be necessarily their own skills. It might be the topic. Again,
too technical or too.
Yeah. Well, a favourite. Again, I was doing some training. I met a PhD student who said, "I can't do engagement with my research because it's really dull. My family mock me all the time for how dull it is." And I was like, "No, come on. I'm sure we can do this. What do you do?" And she was like, "Well, I study how gas structures form in crystal structures or something like that." And I was like, "Okay, what have I started here? Maybe it is really dull." And she was like, "Yeah, well, my PhD is funded by De Beers, and I'm growing diamonds in a lab." And I was like, there we go. There's always a thing, even if you think your research is dull. Probably when you say that, you see people go, "Oh, that's amazing. How does that happen? What do you think?" So sometimes it's about reminding people that what they do is actually fascinating, and that's probably why they wanted to spend 3 or 4 years of their life doing a PhD in it anyway. So just share that joy with some other people. But I think also it comes down to thinking that public engagement means getting on a stage and talking about it, or being at a festival stall and going, "Hey, come hear about this thing." When actually it doesn't have to look like that. So you don't necessarily have to do engagement, which is all kind of jazz hands and look at the joy of my research. It can be, behind a kind of wall. You can be doing it online where you've got that level of detachment. You can do all sorts of things to get non-academic voices into what you do that aren't necessarily being super chipper and outgoing. And I think that message is one that doesn't get across enough. That it feels like you've got to be presenting Horizon, or you've got to, be dancing your PhD or whatever some of the other options are. But actually there are other things you can do. They could be the one doing all the logistics. They could be the one writing the content. They could be the one building the sets. Like, it doesn't mean you aren't part of that public engagement work, even if you don't feel like you're the person who wants to be in the limelight. No,
that's great. And actually, as you're talking about sort of the kind of jazz hands approach, I suppose, to science communication, sometimes, I don't know if you agree, but there is a sense in which passion and enthusiasm amongst the science communication community is fantastic. And it's great that it can be sort of harnessed, and to sort of share that infectious enthusiasm amongst the public is wonderful. But I suspect sometimes that because scientists are often so sort of passionate about that science is wonderful, it's amazing, that there's an assumption that just so long as the public sort of understands that and gets a chance to experience it, they're all going to sort of come on board, which can be potentially, I think, probably a bit of a hindrance, can't it?
I think so, yeah. I think there's a couple of issues there. One, I love it when people are that passionate and just really want to share how much they love their thing. Like it's so infectious. But there is the kind of the negative side of that is this assumption that if everyone knew what you knew, they'd feel the same as you, and that's not how people work.
Yeah, I feel the same way and agree with you on certain matters.
So people can know everything that you know and still have come up with a completely different response. So they won't necessarily think what you think. And they won't necessarily want to do that. And I think that can sometimes disappoint people if they're like, if only people knew about my research, they'd all live their lives differently. Yeah. You've only got to look at how many doctors smoke to realise that that's not how humans work. You can know something and still act differently because that's not how you make decisions. And I think also there's a sense of, again, if you go back to this why are you doing this question and really push people on that, because they're like, I really want to inspire people about this thing. You're like, okay, why? And the people who have a good answer for that come up with brilliant public engagement projects. And the ones who don't, who kind of falter and go, I'm not really sure, tend to find it difficult to work out whether they achieved anything at the end of their project, which means it might feel like, I'm not sure if that was worth it. So I think if you've got a really strong sense of this is why I want people to care about this is why I think it's interesting, this is why I want to have this conversation, you tend to do a lot better in your public engagement work. And a big part of what my team does is just talking that through with people and going, come on, you definitely know this because that's why you've come to this meeting. I just want to help you draw it out and actually articulate it a bit.
That's interesting. And so why somebody's motivations for involving themselves or their research and public engagement is a big question. And I'm assuming part of your job probably is screening a large number of applications, for example, for
funding
grants.
Applications are most of my life. Yes.
Really? Right. Okay.
Yes.
So the question, if somebody sort of will send you an application, obviously explaining why they want to do it is one important thing.
Yes, it's normally the first question on the application form.
Right, okay. So you give them guidance in terms of what they should be answering. Okay. And what are the other things that perhaps, if you are to turn down the opportunity of funding a proposal, what are some of the common pitfalls people have gone through or not explained properly or not thought through that you would suggest?
So many.
Right.
So for context, I worked this out the other day. I've either advised on, been a panel member for, or created or run 20 different funding schemes for public engagement over my. So I've had some experience either as an external reviewer or the main panel chair, or I've administered the scheme or whatever. So at the moment I sit on quite a few, both QM and externally. And I say the biggest thing is say why you want to do it. Yeah. Say what you will actually do. This is not a trick question. Like, it's just like I did some training recently for some sort of people that my friend is mentoring, and I gave them some sort of anonymous funding forms that we'd kind of taken the identifiable information out and been like, here you go, would you fund them? And they were there going, I don't know what it is I'd fund. Really? Like what do they want to do? And you're like, no clue. That happens more often than you think, because if you're writing this in a rush, you know what you want to do. It's in your head. Yeah. And so you often forget to put certain details in or really, really describe, okay, I'm going to run a series of events that are going to happen at this time. You don't tend to put that detail in. You go, I want to explore this topic with this group of people using kind of interactive media. And you're like, okay, but what am I giving you the money for? Like, what's actually going to happen? And it's fine to be vague in one sense, because if you want to truly work in a collaborative way, you can't really know what you're going to do when you start. But I do want to see a little bit about how you're going to go about it.
Sure.
The main pitfall, though, is the budget.
Right.
People like myself who read a lot of panel applications, we will often look at the budget first, because often it's the only section which tells you what you're actually going to do, because it has like venue hire these people, buy these things, bring in these artists, and you're like, okay, I'm getting a sense of the project. Make sure your budget adds up. Make sure it's within the amount that the scheme is for. You'd be surprised. And if you need more than that, and this is part funding it, say where you're going to get the rest of the money from, because I don't know if I give you the £1,000 when you need to, are you going to be able to run the event? Have you already got it? Like, just give me enough information to be able to fund you. That's all I want to do. I want to fund the projects. I want to spend the money. Give me the information I need to be able to do that, which means be really clear about what you want to do and why you want to do it and how much money you need. And if you can do that, because it sounds really simple and everyone goes, well, obviously. But then once you have to kind of read, 10 or 20 applications a month, you're like, only 3 of these actually really answered those questions. The rest I'm taking quite a lot on faith. Like, you're probably going to do this well, but I don't know it. Yeah, so I think just be really clear about what you're going to do. Really look at what you're going to spend the money on. And, there is a sort of sense of value for money. And I know some funding panels will look at kind of cost per head, which I don't like. I don't like it because to steal some ref terminology, the difference between reach and significance of your engagement. So reach is the number of people you'll impact, and the significance is how intense, how significant that impact is going to be. And our view, certainly at QM and through F as well, is that having a really significant impact on 40 people is as valuable as having a kind of light touch impact on 300. So I don't like cost per head, but do think about value for money. If it's like, I want to buy a solid gold table I'm going to use once for this really important event, and then I'm just going to throw it away afterwards, then you're like, oh, it's probably not going to it's not going to go very well, is it?
Evaluation is obviously an important factor as well.
Yes,
and
huge.
So when it comes to not just applying for a grant, but suggesting ideas to you, so where does the point at which evaluation kind of comes into play?
Right at the start, ideally. And I think, so I have quite strong views on this. I think evaluation is essential, but also a lot of people don't do it. So if you have from the start a really clear sense of why am I doing this? What change am I trying to make in the world as a result of this project? And, it doesn't have to be a huge change. It doesn't have to, it could be like, I want 10 people to feel differently about this topic. That's a change. Yeah. They are different as a result of the work that you've done. It becomes very easy to work out methods you might use to capture that. Because you're like, okay, I might just ask people. I might find an interesting way of asking them. I might get them to drop marbles into boxes to say whether they feel different. Like, you can start to come up with an evaluation framework if you've got a why. If you haven't got a why, it's almost impossible to work out whether you achieved anything, because you don't know what you were setting out to achieve, and it becomes this mess. So the time spent evaluating projects from the start saves you so much time afterwards. A really good piece of advice I got recently was that you should spend as much time planning your evaluation as collecting the data, as analysing the data.
Right.
And most people spend no time planning it, collect everything, and then go, that's too big a pile, I'm just going to walk away and never read any of those forms.
I'm sure it went fine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that sense of plan it right from the start is really, really helpful. And chances are, if you're doing a public engagement project, you know this, you know why you want to do it. That's why you've gone to the effort of applying for funding, and just spend that afternoon forcing yourself to write it down.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? What do I want to be different? Okay. How do I capture that? Who do I ask? Is it the organisers I need to ask? Is it the people who come along to the event? What questions do I need to ask to capture this? And then you can start to look at what methods help and make a value judgment on that information, because there's a huge difference between monitoring, which is just capturing information. So how many people came to my event? Here's some photos of it. What do people say? And then you're not really evaluating it unless you're making a value judgment on that information.
Right.
So I can say of our Festival of Communities that over 3,500 people came. That's not evaluation data, that's monitoring data. It only becomes evaluation when I say, which is amazing because it's more than we had in the first year, it shows growth of the festival, it's more than we were expecting, it's more than other festivals of this scale. So I start to put some context around it and a sense of whether it was what I was hoping for, suddenly it becomes evaluation. But if you just throw big numbers out there in the hope that you're impressing someone, then you're not really evaluating it. And I think that's where people fall down with things like REF, where you're being asked to really show that you've made a change, and people go, hey, 2,000 people read my thing, and they're like, and?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm sort of petrified of in my work. I'm petrified of people doing good work and not being able to show that it was good, and as a result not getting the adequate reward for it.
Sure. And I think that potentially that's because the work that I do is largely in the kind of digital sphere. When it comes to sort of evaluation of digital projects, how, I suppose at events, perhaps, as you say, marbles and boxes, sort of questionnaires and so on, it might be, do you think it's easier to evaluate when people are there sort of physically compared to sort of a digital project? What advice do you have?
If someone's there physically, you've got slightly more options you can employ. There are more kind of well tried and tested ways of getting information out of people. My background was in website design, so I love online things. So I think it's great. I did used to get very frustrated back, in the annals of history, and people were like, I want more hits on my webpage. And you'd be like, I just add 2 more images on it. And then every time someone downloads it, the hits will go up. Okay, it's not going to change anything. This is a pointless metric. But how many views you've got. I think, again, if you work out why, the example I tend to use when I'm training is a personal one. I have a blog about my obsession with plastic jewellery.
Right.
And I've been very clear that the reasons I have that are to capture my own ever-growing collection of it, to meet other people who like the same stuff, to interact with people who sell it, and ideally get free stuff. That was the dream. I set it up because a company I love did a competition that was like Customer of the Month. You'll get a free necklace if you talk about our stuff online. I was like, right. And so I've got a certain amount of followers on my Instagram account. I've got a certain amount of people who read the blog. It's not very big, but I've had jewelry companies send me pictures of their upcoming designs to see what I think of them before they release them, before they make them. I've had people send me thank you presents, like, oh, thanks for featuring my jewelry on your blog. I sold 5 more after you post about it, so here's a free necklace.
Yeah.
I've met a group of people who I adore through it, and we meet up a couple of times a year. So I've achieved all my aims from my online project, none of which are really evidenced by me pointing at a number and going, look how many people I've reached. So I think you can do that with your SciComm project. You can say, why do I want to put this stuff online? Why do I want to have these conversations online, and with who? And then see whether you're doing it. And the answer won't always be to chase a bigger likes number or a bigger kind of number of views or number of downloads. It might be the conversations you have around it and the people who come up to you. Think about why you're doing it and then capture it. And
I suppose also let it take time, because presumably it wasn't overnight.
No, I've been doing this for years now. It won't happen quickly. I mean, I think everyone dreams of that kind of viral news story that's going to go everywhere, and I've made a big difference.
Those tend to fizzle out very quickly.
Fizzle out and seem incredibly stressful for everyone involved. So I'm not sure that's the thing you should be chasing.
Maybe we could finish then with, if you wouldn't mind, giving a couple of takeaways for people. One, for those who are considering a career in public engagement.
Get out now.
Aside from getting out. And then
Run,
people who are sort of researchers who are looking to get involved in public engagement, because it's sort of two separate fields, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, although for both sides, I would say the answer is probably don't underestimate the amount of work that goes into it and the amount of specialist knowledge that goes in on both sides. I think often problems in this tend to come from people not having a bit of a lack of professional respect for each other. It's very easy for public engagement people to go, oh God, these researchers, they just can't fill in an application form to save their life. It's very easy for researchers to go, why don't these people understand how busy I am? I've got to do 4/7 things. And you get this kind of divide which doesn't help anyone. So I think recognize the value that if you're working with external sort of SciComm people, so the podcasters, people, journalists, people who make stuff, value their knowledge and their experience. They know what they're doing. That's why they've got that job. Likewise, if you're on the other side of that, value that researcher's time and their knowledge and what they're bringing to this, because they're giving up a lot to kind of be part of this sometimes. I think if you want to get into a job in public engagement, think about what skills you can demonstrate of kind of organising things and being the behind the scenes person. Because the biggest piece of advice I give to people, I have a lot of these chats, people go, I'm finishing my PhD. The most enjoyable thing about it has been doing the engagement, not the science. I've decided a scientific career isn't for me. I really want to kind of move into public engagement. The question I will always ask them is, what's the bit about it that they loved the most? Because if what they loved about it was being the one on stage talking about their science, then public engagement is not a career for them. They are better off going into a research career where they get to do engagement alongside their work. If, like me, you have no desire to be in the limelight and you want to be the behind the scenes person, you want to run a funding scheme, you want to write strategies, you want to run training courses, you want to allow other people to thrive and shine because you've put all that groundwork in, so they've got a mechanism to do what they want to do. Public engagement is a career for you. And it's difficult sometimes if your whole career is helping other people look good. But that's what's most rewarding for me. And I think if you want to be the one who's delivering those outreach workshops and you want to be the one presenting those TV shows, doing my job would make you very sad because all you do is help other people do those things. And you have to write a strategy, and then you have to go to a board meeting, and then you have to review funding applications, and it's a very different set of work. And I think that work can be hidden sometimes because if you work in public engagement, you're so desperate to make this seem like it'll be fun and a good idea that you don't want to show people just how much effort goes in and behind the scenes, because you don't want to be off-putting. Yeah. But that then kind of occasionally sort of stabs us in our own back, because people go, well, surely this is easy. You just rock up and suddenly you deliver this brilliant workshop. Yeah. And we're like, actually, it took me 5 years to refine that. And spent a lot of time learning how to do that. And there's a lot of risk assessments involved. So I think, beware of, do you want to be the one doing the talking? In which case, maybe a job like mine isn't for you. But if you are the kind of person who's like, oh, I really enjoyed training up my fellow kind of colleagues, and I enjoyed providing opportunities for them to talk about stuff, public engagement is definitely a career you should think about.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So that was my conversation with Kimberley Freeman. As I expected, as I knew it would be, full of fascinating insights. She's a woman who has dedicated an enormous amount of her professional and personal time to furthering the cause of public engagement, and has done some really inspirational work in that field. So very grateful to Kimberley for giving me her time to take part in this podcast. I really hope people have found it useful. I would love to hear what you think. Any further questions that have spun off the back of our conversation, or thoughts about your own involvement in public engagement? Is anybody thinking about a career in the sector that would like to get in touch to chat about it? That would be great to hear. Until next time.